Hello? 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 It's working. Hello? 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 Hello?
Check, check. Oh, this is on, right? Okay, cool. Oh, where's this one looks like it's working. All right, everybody. Let's come on down. Bring some chairs if you want to sit on one. Oh. Are you serious? Like, there's no way to turn it off? Do you want to text Tunde? Like, it shouldn't have just turned on, right? We are trying to turn off the music. Oh. Did anybody turn on the music? Nobody in the house. Do you want to put this over there? Actually, I think more people will be able to see it. Yeah. Can you, is there no way, like, why would it turn? Well, like, there's no reason why it would suddenly turn on, right? Somebody had to have taken it out. Hey, the music kind of suddenly turned on. I'm trying to figure out how to turn it off. Genius. Okay, thank you. All right, sorry. I'll talk to you later. Bye. Cairo for the win. This is a Harvard-educated woman over here. All right, everybody. We are ready to get started very soon. Actually, right now-ish. How do we not figure out the off button? Calling the landlord, calling Tunde, calling all these people. What? No, Carol just did it. Oh, really? Okay. I'm giving her credit. All right, y'all. This is a really, really special night. Feel free to have a seat. We have Jacob Peters, co-founder of Launch House, GP House Capital, all-around magic man. There's more that meets the eye here. He may look young, but he has raised lots and lots and lots of venture capital for multiple companies. His last company before Launch House is worth lots of money, doing very well. So he has the Midas touch, so to speak, in the founder world. So yeah, I'm excited. Give it up for Jacob Peters. We turned his mic off so he can't speak.
Hello, hello. Okay, so you're telling me I have to use this thing the whole session?
Yeah. So this is a fundraising talk, and you typically have a presentation you give, right?
I do, but I'm going to do what every entrepreneur has to do when they're in front of an investor, which is wing it. So tonight we're going just me, myself, and my brain. So no crutch.
Yeah. And by the way, this was not going to be a fireside chat Q&A, so we'll lean into the winging it as well. All right, where would you start? Hypothetical first slide. What's the most important thing for founders to know when raising capital? Or maybe even if there's any sort of background or preamble that's important.
Well, there's a million things, and I love my whiteboard, so we're going to make heavy use of this during the session. But I think the biggest thing is that it starts with mindset. And I'll say this one phrase that I hope everybody really deeply internalizes. Cara, stop mocking me. She's upset because she wrote a bunch of notes on the whiteboard, and I erased them earlier without knowing they were important, so I goofed up, and hopefully she doesn't hate me too much. But I'm going to make up for it by sharing some, hopefully, fundraising knowledge and alpha with you guys. But the one phrase that I wanted everybody to really deeply internalize is that you have the leverage. You are the scarce resource, right? You need to go into every investor conversation, every conversation in which you talk about your business, and remember that you are the prized possession, and your company, is the lottery ticket, right? And any investor, stakeholder, customer, employee should be lucky if they get the chance to, be a part of that mission and that rocket ship. And it's too often the other way around, right? Where investors feel founders often feel like, it's investors that they have to prove something to, right? Or big customers. And yes, sure, that's somewhat the case, but it's a psychological hack to invert that and, tell yourself that, hey, I'm on a different plane over here, and people should be lucky if they can get what I have. So that is, a big thing to remember. And, this isn't just me peddling this maxim at you guys in a silo. There's actually a lot of context that's happening in the industry right now that should make you feel confident that the winds have changed, and founders are in a much better position than they were even, a few years, if not decades ago, when the Valley first started, right? The sources of capital and different ways you can get your business off the ground are really abundant. So little Silicon Valley history lesson and side note, I'd actually encourage everybody to really study up on the history of Silicon Valley and the venture industry and in the startup world. Too many people, they just got into this game a few years ago and really sort of lack that long-term pattern recognition as to what happened in the past, over past cycles, how markets have evolved, how tech has evolved and innovated. So I've been doing a lot of research and study into this space. There's a few good books. One that I like a lot is called Secrets of Sand Hill Road. It's about kind of the history of venture capital. There's a few others that I can send them after the fact, since I don't have my notes in front of me. But what understanding the history really does is it lets you walk a mile in the shoes of investors, right? So if you want to successfully pitch VCs, you have to really speak their language, right? And look at things from their perspective. So this helps with that a lot. But another thing that I've learned, by studying the history of Silicon Valley and the evolution of the startup world is that, again, the winds have changed in favor of the founders. So 15, 20 years ago, there were very few institutional venture capital firms, right? It was the Greylocks of the world and, the Bessemers and folks that had maybe been around since the 80s or popped up during the tech bubble, or the tech boom, but that was pretty much it, right? Now there's thousands of venture capital firms with 10, 50, $100 billion plus of AUM. And then there's, even more thousands of small micro firms, funds. There's crowdfunding platforms where you can raise, a few $100K from your early customers. I'm talking about places like WeFunder, Republic, if anyone's familiar. There's been so much new wealth created in the technology industry by exited founders, early tech employees at, all the big companies and unicorns, that guess what? All of them are now angel investors. Platforms like AngelList have enabled this to make it really easy and turnkey for anybody to invest in startups, right? All the talking heads on Twitter that we probably all follow, they all have rolling funds or, small funds across them, between them. Crypto obviously has enabled communities and DAOs to mobilize to be able to invest. Influencers are launching venture funds because they're newsletter writers. They're all realizing that they have something that founders need, which is distribution. So they are there for launch. The point I'm getting at here is capital is ubiquitous, capital is abundant, capital is commoditized. And, in that sort of market, you should have the mentality like, wow, I could get this money from anywhere. I don't need to put these investors on some sort of mental pedestal and let them, have the power over me. I should have the power over them. So that's a long-winded way of, saying you have the leverage, right? You have the power, control the narrative.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Okay, so by the way, I love this narrative because Jacob and I was super back on this one. But okay, so we're in a big market downturn. A couple months ago, a lot of investors were saying sky is falling. This is like the dot-com bubble. How does that change, this capital abundance, or does it not change it? Are there still just as many funds? How should that change a founder's mentality about things?
Yeah, so I'd be blind and lying if I say it doesn't change anything, because it has changed a bit of things. I'd say like the really obviously stupid shit is not getting funded anymore. Like there was a ton of like Web3 excess that was happening, even as early as like January of this past year. That I just look at these projects that were getting venture money. I'm like, this is like hot, overvalued garbage, like with no business fundamentals. That's like 10 years too early. Like the pandemic has basically rubbed the wool off of everybody's eyes, and investors are like applying a little bit more scrutiny. So guess what? That's probably not a bad thing for anyone in this room, because I venture to say if anyone's sitting here, they're probably not building flaming hot, overvalued garbage. So, so that's certainly what's changed. I'd also say like the valuations have come down, which again isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? So there's a little bit more scrutiny as to like how much you can justify raising at as far as your valuation cap goes, but that's not a bad thing, because it means that you're going to have a higher chance of raising a bigger round with a higher cap later. Because if you were to raise, say, maybe like, a seed round at a 20 million valuation, which is probably like the median or mean round size this is post money cap that I saw, about like a year ago. Guess what? Every round you're generally expected as a heuristic to 2 to 3x, if not more, your valuation cap. So if you raise it a $20 million round, that means like you now have to get to 40 to 60 million, which you really kind of have to have some revenue or some meaningful traction to get there. And like the more and more you pump up the valuation cap, the harder it is to justify that, right, with your traction. So it basically, like what I'm getting at is that more traction is going to be demanded of you, the higher valuation that you raise at. So I'd say it's a good thing that, valuations have come down. We're kind of getting back into the world of, reality. I mean, just look at the public markets. A lot of software companies that were valued like 80x revenue are now valued like 8x revenue. Right, so it's like a healthy correction. They're probably overvalued anyway. So I'd say valuations are more in line with just the reality of a healthy financial system, which is not a bad thing. The other thing that maybe hasn't changed is, guess what? There's still probably just as many seed-funded companies getting funded. And why is that? It's because, guess what? Venture capital funds already raised their funds. So they have dry powder that they're sitting on that like basically needs to get deployed because they made an obligation to their LP investors. And if I'm saying any, like, I'm just, I don't know how, like, what level of like, VC lingo proficiency folks have in the room. So I can deep dive a little bit later into like, how to think about LPs and fund structures and like basically looking at things from the perspective of a VC and walking a mile in their shoes for those that might not know as well, because I think it'll be really, really helpful. So we can dive into that maybe after the Q&A, or if the Q&A takes us here. But again, like walking a mile in the shoes of investors is really important to do.
So market downturn, fundamentals are even more important. No flaming hot garbage. Got it. Basically unit economics, right? Focusing on making sure your business like makes sense from a business perspective. What would you say, like, actually, for show of hands, who would be raising like their first round of capital ever, if you were thinking about raising? Okay, cool. Pre-seed-ish. Okay, who is raising a seed-ish? Who is just raising some money in general? Yeah. So obviously you kind of mentioned that these dynamics change every stage, right? So what would you say the most important things for people in the very early stage, first round of funding, should be focused on? And then maybe like the seed, like pre-seed and seed. What are those things like an investor is looking at when you send the deck over, when you're reading that deck? What are you thinking about? And when you're talking to the founder, what are you thinking about? What's going to be the yes or no decision for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll answer it a little bit differently, which is one, don't have a deck. Brett mentioned a deck. I think all investors love Notion docs. I love Notion docs. Hopefully everyone uses Notion. But yeah, basically like the idea is there's a reason why Jeff Bezos and Amazon like have this culture of like written memos in place of meetings or like ahead of meetings. I don't know if anyone knows this, but they like force employees to just like write in like 2 pages very concisely any sort of business proposal that they have. And like the written word, I think, is like a very powerful forcing function for clarity of thought. And it's like it's a litmus test for like, does this founder actually know their stuff? Because look, like anyone can create, a pretty slide deck. And maybe a slide deck is like a, perfectly fine information medium for communicating a pitch. But like, I don't know, personally, like I love when I see a well-written memo that has 8 subheaders with maybe like a paragraph underneath each. And those 8 subheaders take me through a story. So each header says something about like, hey, this is some massive trend that's happening in the world, but that trend is creating problems. So we're building this solution. The solution's working because of X. By the way, our team was born to build this solution. Here's how this could get even bigger, something like that, right? As headers. And I just told like a really compelling story that I could skim as like a investor in a VC. And I can send some examples of this after the fact. Like, I'll give you an example to maybe make this, a little more live. I was working with a founder a few weeks ago who I met on this TV show. And Brett, am I spoiling something you're going to bring up later? Or
no, I alluded to it in the info.
Brett alluded to it. But so my birthday is December 21st, and I have this episode coming out on NBC on December 21st. So if anyone wants to watch it, you can. Primetime, 8:30 p.m. But it was basically like a show kind of like Shark Tank. And I was like one of the guest judges, and I got pitched to by this company. And something's ringing.
That's the...
And, really brilliant founder, like great concept. I got it kind of, but then like after the show, they had to send me all the details and docs, and like, it was like a really awful deck. And I was like, this is like horrible. Like the product was does anyone know Oura Ring, like the sleep tracking app? Okay. Yeah. I see a lot of fellow biohackers in the room. Okay, great. So this is basically like an Oura Ring for your mouth. So they're building a night guard, which like a lot of people wear for teeth grinding. And it has like a little chip in it so that it can detect how you're grinding your teeth, right? And the idea is like you can start to make different lifestyle interventions, like a supplement here, a meditation routine there, a lifestyle change, and then track how much you're grinding your teeth based on like your lifestyle interventions. And teeth grinding is a great proxy for like stress in your body and like quality of your sleep, basically. But like the deck just did like, was just like, hey, we're building like a wearable mouth guard company. I'm like, okay, great. Like this doesn't really say much. So we sat down and like literally went like line by line and created this story on Notion using like this memo format. Where we were like, okay, let's start with something. Let's not start with the product. Let's start with, at the highest level, context that we want to position your product and your solution within, right? And this goes back to like Brett's question, which is like, what do investors look for? And like they look for a really good story, right? That's like really easy to grok. And I just like love a memo format as like one of the best ways to do this. So like regardless of what stage your fundraise is in, or maybe you've already raised, like I think having a great like simple succinct memo on deck can be great. But back to the story. I hope I'm not jumping too much all over the place because this is just how my brain works. For those not familiar who haven't spent much time talking to me. But the idea is you want to paint, you don't want to start talking about your company. You want to start talking about some like massively huge, undeniable megatrends that are happening in the world, aka like the context, right? Like the environment in which your product lives in. So for this Oura Ring for your mouth example, I was like, okay, let's talk about like, the fact that like the healthcare system is broken and like healthcare is becoming self-care, right? Like we're not talking about the product, we're talking about this huge trend. Like the healthcare, everyone knows is a multi-trillion-dollar industry, but guess what? Like out-of-pocket healthcare spending is growing by like, it's like doubling every year basically because healthcare is not meeting the needs of people. So like we didn't talk about the product in the memo. The first line was like, self-care is the new healthcare. Okay, wow. Now as an investor, I'm paying attention, right? Like they're not pitching me some product. They're pitching me like a big context. And then we had some data to back that up where we're like, okay, out-of-pocket healthcare spending is increasing. And then we say, second line in the memo, every health category is seeing massive innovation, but oral care is lagging behind, right? So then we gave some examples of like, in the sleep category, you used to have to go to like a sleep study person and it was really shitty and like no one did it. Now it's Oura Ring, right? You used to have to like track your food in a food diary or like go see a shitty nutritionist. Now we have levels patches that track your blood glucose, right? You used to have to go to like a shitty primary care physician and like they were useless. Now like you have all these teledocs. You used to have to go to the dentist, to solve some of your health issues. It's really shitty. Now there's nothing, right? Category opportunity. So, the idea is like, we're not really talking about the product. We're talking about these like big, massive trends and like, issues with the current trends. And then we can start to talk about the product and the solution. So that's like, I think rule number one to storytelling is like always start by like anchoring your product within like a really huge context and trend before even talking about the product and like find a way to communicate that to investors, like from what you see, whether it's like a Notion memo or like bullets that you send over. So I'll start like leveraging the whiteboard here, and we'll talk about like things that are kind of like the fundraising essentials. So we'll call them like Jacob's fundraising toolkit.
By the way, I want to make a quick plug for this TV show. Allegedly, a founder was pitching their story so poorly, this guy gets up and pitches it for him on the TV show. So this guy knows his stuff.
I may have done that. How'd you hear about that? Okay, so
Word gets around.
Story. Okay, cool. So you want to anchor like your product in like a huge context, and like the story is really, really important. Yeah.
Does anybody want to throw out what they're building and see if we can come up with a really big story or context?
Ooh, improv. Let's do it.
I'm happy to do it.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So I can pitch it the shitty way first, and then you can do it the good way. Okay, cool. So I'm pitching a sustainable financial management platform that allows people to pool their shares with other investors and advocate for changes at public companies. So to put it in the context of like a larger thing, we could say sustainable investing has been a huge thing over the past 10, 15 years, but it's bullshit for X, Y, and Z reasons. We are doing this thing where we allow investors to advocate for campaigns at companies in their portfolio. So where do you want me to go from there?
Got it. Okay, so did everybody basically building some sort of sustainable financial management platform to help people
For activist investing.
activist investing. Got it. So Ellie tried to like, start saying, okay, like maybe the big picture context here is environmental, like, what was it? It was sustainability, like kind of sucks right now, but like we want to change that. Okay, that's fair. That's like, but that's the problem, right? It's not necessarily like the context. We have to go one level above that, right? So maybe one level above this problem that his product could solve is that like, look, the world is moving from one dominated by corporations and big faceless organizations to one in which people have the power. Okay, now,
Amen.
yeah. Now that is like
Yeah.
a heavy hitting, I think, one line, that like no one would deny, right? Like, dozens of years ago, like companies had all the power, like, journalists had all the power, like media's had all the power. Now, like everybody's a social media influencer, people can mobilize, like we see, women's rights marches, like all, it's completely changing. and flipping. So like that's a huge trend that nobody would deny. And we can say as a second, so if that's the first memo item, right? Like the domination of corporate, overlords is over. People now have the power. Okay, great. It's happening in every industry. Show politics here. It's happening in journalism, right? It used to be big media conglomerates. Now it's citizen journalists. It's social media people. It's blah, blah, blah. But guess what? When it comes to environmental sustainability, they're still stuck in the fucking dark ages, right? No, nothing's happening. So we're solving that by building a platform that makes it really easy for, people to band together to socially influence companies and better the planet.
Could you also, so one thing I think also kind of works is like latching onto generational trends. So there's this expression that like Hunter Walk had where he was like, kind of culture basically gets rewritten every like five-ish years as new generations enter workforces, get money that they can use for investing and stuff like that. So another idea is like, what are the biggest trends associated with new generations reaching new levels? So like Open Door's whole thing was about millennials growing up with technology and wanting to buy houses suddenly, right? The same thing is happening with senior care because millennials are now taking care of their parents but they grew up with technology. So for you, one of the most amazing trends that I see here personally is like Gen Z and young millennial care a shit ton about the environment and about the world. And we're entering this era of post-capitalism, which that's not even like a macro trend, it's a macro trend. Capitalism's been around for like many, many generations, but saying like post-capitalism, this idea of people wanting more from corporations, people demanding more out of work, this is such a massive trend that you kind of want to say something like activist investing will become investing, right? It's not just a niche part of investing. It is the part of investing, And then you can mention like sleeping giants and like how a lot of activist groups have kind of figured out that the financial, pieces of a company are where to pull from.
Yeah, another way to think about this is like know your why now moment, right? Like the biggest companies get built when they're riding like 5 to 6 of these massive waves, right? Because like if you're riding only one wave and then that wave gets hit by like a black swan industry event or, just the wave wasn't as big as you thought it was or it crashed early or like the wave's still too far out in the ocean and it's not going to come to shore for another 10 years, like your business just failed. But if you have like 5, 6 waves that you're riding, right? Like just 5 or 6 massive trends, then guess what? Like if one fails, your business is more likely to, succeed because you have 4 others to ride on. So Steve Jobs has a great quote that I'm sure all of us have heard, right? Like nobody cares what you do, they care why you do it. Like no one cares what you're building. They care like about the why and like the mega trends and like the context in which it sits in. Because the reality is like an investor is really betting on, you as a person and your ability to deliver and then like the market, right? Like and is the market going to be bigger in 10 years? Like are the winds of change, are the trends that we're talking about real? Are they happening? Are there multiple of them that are accelerating this, market opportunity? That's what people care about. Fundraising also is like way simpler than people think. Like I think everyone overcomplicates it. I like to just take it back to math class. So maybe we'll say like, we'll go back to our idea of like walking a mile in investor's shoes. Like what is an investor really doing? They're doing a really simple equation. Does anybody remember that one from algebra class? It starts with a y equals mx plus b. There we go. Okay, so one of the great ways to simplify fundraising is that it's literally just a y equals mx plus b equation, right? And in this case, y is a binary output, right? It's like a 0 or 1 threshold, right? 0 is not invest, 1 is invest, and it equals mx1 plus mx2 plus mx3 plus mx4 plus b. What is b? It's just like some coefficient for randomness, right? Like there's always some sort of luck that you can't control when it comes to an investor conversation, right? Maybe they had a really good breakfast or maybe they had a fight with their husband or wife the night before and like they're just not in a good mood or like whatever, and it's just not your day. They might not invest, or like they might invest. So we don't have to worry about B though, right? But what are these MX variables? Well, usually it's like 4 really, really simple things. It's M, which is a weight, right? It's a weight applied to X1, so X1 could be the team. X2 is the market. X3 is the like product. And then you could say X4 is the traction. There might be a few more. Some people combine product and traction or whatever, but like by and large, there's really 4 main simple concepts that investors are looking at when they're evaluating your company. And each of these has a weight associated with it. So if you have like a really killer team, like, oh wow, this person has an amazing personal story that just made them like uber passionate about this problem. Or like maybe they went to like some sort of blue chip institution and like had a great job and like they're carrying all this expertise with them. Or maybe like they had like, a really great experience at an early stage startup that gave them, insights into this industry or something. Or whatever the reason is, like they're making some sort of like they're basically attaching some sort of basic weight to your team level, right? So like if LAU, for example, like they're like, wow, like you have the perfect team for this product, like they might apply like, a 0.8 weight, right? But it's like, okay, hey, like I'm just not sure if like this post, capitalist thing is real, like the market, it's kind of nebulous, let's like assign that a 0.2. But wow, their product, like I don't understand the market, but like it's killer, right? 0.9. Traction, oh wow, they actually have all these signups, like there's a big wait list. That's pretty cool. We'll give that like a 0.75. And then what they'll do is they'll add up, all of these. Look, no one's actually really doing it this quantitatively, but you guys get the idea, right? Like this is just an equation that they're kind of automatically doing with the algorithm in their brain to say like, loosely does this sort of jive with, my expectations of the world and like my pattern matching relative to what I've seen. So once they add all this up, it might say like, this is like a, 0.5. Okay, like if I'm feeling it's a good day, I'll round this 0.5 up to 1 and therefore I'll invest, right? So yes, question. That's a great question because it's not this simple. A startup, the one way to think about a startup is like literally like an n-dimensional plane, right? Like this is a y equals mx plus b chart, just a simple axis. But guess what? Like there's so many directions you could take a company in, so many things that could like go wrong in a company. Like what is a company really? And you can tell I'm a math person, but like it's literally like an n-dimensional plane. Like there's just so many different like angles and dimensions by which like you could evaluate a company, directions you could take it in. And this is a company. Now guess what this is over here? This is the world. This is the market. Think about how fucking complex the world is. There's like so much happening in our economy and our world like every single day. And what you're really trying to do with a startup is you're trying to get like your n-dimensional plane to intersect with the n-dimensional plane of the market at just the perfectly right, calculated interval so that you get product market fit and the company succeeds and gets really big. But like getting two just like massive multi-dimensional like problem spaces to collide in the perfect way, like Big Bang style, is so hard. And there's like so much that could go wrong. Like it's like laughable, right? How much could go wrong. So even if like you have the best analysis and the best data and the best information at the time when you're making a decision as a VC, all of that could change later on down the line and get thrown out the window for this exact reason that like we're operating in a very highly dimensional like mathematical space when it comes to company building.
Other thing I want to add / turn into a question for you is investing is also a very emotional thing. There's a lot of math behind it, but this math is actually like clouded by a lot of emotion. So like what are some things like that investors, and I think this comes down to like the personal kind of desires of an investor, like getting into the psychology of like an investor's head, what the desire for their lives, their careers, their families, their reputations, like what's the emotional side of investing?
Yeah, I mean, you have to, again, walk a mile in an investor's shoes. Like, what are they doing? They have a job. That job is to deliver returns on invested capital for their LPs. Most investors have like, anywhere from a handful to like a few hundred LP investors. Depending on the size of the fund, like these could be, 20, 50, $100 million checks that LP investors put into their fund. So people sort of see all the talking head VCs on Twitter and like think that it's this like glamorous job. But I say from experience, both sitting on the founder side and the investor side of the table, that like, it's a lot of work to keep these people happy. And like at the end of the day, like you're a steward of their capital. So there's like, a certain pressure to deliver. And like that's how they put food on the table, right? So as soon as you start to like think a little bit more about VCs and how like their minds work, it gives you an advantage. You should also know how like the fund math of their portfolio works. So I'm going to erase my beautiful n-dimensional planes here. Rip. Damn, no one laughed. And this is like pretty evident stuff, I'm sure, but like, for those that aren't as familiar, like it's just good to remind yourself that, you as one company might not matter that much to a VC in a big portfolio, or it could be the fund returner, right? So you just have to know how the math works. So if we'll talk about this as like dollar value of outcomes and like, this is like, I don't know where the outcomes fall. So I'm trying to think how to draw this. I don't know. Basically, like a VC is making like, I don't know, on average, like 20, 30, 50, 100 bets across a portfolio, right? And like the majority of them are going to like end up, pretty worthless or break even. A few of them might, do like, a few $100 million in, exits that get acquired, whatnot. And then there's going to be like, one or two that like go public, IPO, do really well. And like probably 95% of the fund returns like get into the portfolio as a result of like one or two big winners. So like they're really playing like, it's a hits-driven business essentially, right? It's just like Hollywood, it's just like media. So that's the game that investors are playing. So you kind of have to know that. So like your job really during these meetings is to like convince them that like you have the best possible chance of ending up here. And how do you do that? Well, like you make sure that each of these components of your business equation sound like really good to them, and you de-risk it. Because again, like what are they doing here? They're calculating a probability score that you're going to hit this top quadrant of the return graph, right? So how do you de-risk that? One way to de-risk it, to Brett's point, is like tell an emotional story, not a rational story. So VCs, like, or at least a lot of them are like numbers and mathematical people, and they're thinking about like, these equations and fund returns and blah, 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 or like, the size of your market or the unit economics. But like, as soon as someone starts thinking rationally, they're basically like, looking for reasons to say no, But what you can do is you can basically hack the psychology of the investor you're talking to and like get them thinking really irrationally, AKA emotionally, by like artfully telling your story in such a manner that like you don't really mention numbers that much, and you keep the thing very high level and vision oriented, and like you only use numbers as like these like subtle ancillary support, figures to like drive home your emotional part of the story, right? So we can talk a little bit more if that's confusing anyone about tactically how to do that or what that could look like. But like by and large, you want to get investors thinking emotionally, not rationally. Like think about this is like the whole idea of marketing as like an industry, right? It's like to get consumers thinking irrationally and just like buy things on a whim and make like impulse purchase decisions. What is a VC doing from you? They're purchasing a piece of your company. So you can apply the exact same marketing rationale to investors.
Can you talk a little bit about, so we're talking about returns, this graph over here. Can you talk about the difference between like how an angel thinks about returns versus how a big $100 million or $1 billion fund would think about returns? Like when a $1 billion fund is looking at your company, let's say $500 million, $1 billion seed stage fund, looking at your company, what do they need to believe about you versus an angel investor? Like, what do they need to believe? Like, how is that different?
Yeah, I mean, look, a big institutional VC needs to know that you're going to have a high likelihood of being in the top right quadrant of that graph. An angel investor,
like a $1 billion plus fund to company.
Yeah, like literally $1 billion plus company.
So if I'm talking to like any sort of like the big name blue chip funds, they have to genuinely believe that my company is going to be a 5, 10, $20 billion company for them to even want to take a call.
I'd say so, yes. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Why?
Because, the fun math, right?
Yeah, the fun math, bro. Okay. Yeah, it's true. But like angels might not have that same viewpoint. You could communicate a totally different. And I'm gonna tell you guys something that like no one's gonna tell you. So like this is, I guess it is being recorded, so it can't be off the record conversation. But the reality is like a lot of founders that I meet like would probably have a pretty nice life if like they raised $500,000 from angel investors who had a different type of return profile and told them, hey, look, like we're gonna like 10x your money, or like build a healthy, profitable, cash flowing $5 million ARR business, and like you'll get a nice dividend payout at some point, or like we might buy out our investors later and have a great life, instead of like getting, sucked into like, oh, I have to build $1 billion company or bust. That's great. But like the reality is not everybody's designed for that. You kind of, will realize that pretty quickly as you get on your journey. And like you can sense, is the market demand there or not? Like, do I have what it takes? I think everybody in this room wouldn't be here if they didn't like think that they have what it takes. So bravo. But like the reality is, you should be intellectually honest with yourself and figure out, can I like maybe take my first few $100K from angel investors, communicate a slightly different return profile and expectation, and then go from there? Because it, again, like de-risks the lifestyle for yourself, right? Like in the outcome, and it's probably more in line with like what angel investors can expect or like want with their money, and it still buys the optionality of like going big or going home with like a more institutional VC raise later. So like, I don't think enough founders get that advice, but I think it's pretty good advice.
I was going to say, so you started talking about storytelling as like one of the most important things in telling a very big story. That's directly related to the return profiles, right?
Yeah.
So when we're talking about the future of activist investing, wow, all of investing is a way bigger market than activist investing, right? So if you're talking to a big institutional, you probably need to tell them about activist investing becoming all investing, What would you say? So let's get more tactical. So, a lot of folks are starting fundraisers, thinking about starting fundraisers. There's just a lot of like really specific things that I think you probably know that a founder should do. First things first, like, if you're thinking about starting a fundraise, what's the first thing you got to do? Aside from getting your story right, getting your Notion doc in place, you doing some kumbaya, believing in yourself. What is the tactical thing that you recommend?
So kumbaya, believing in yourself for sure, right? Get your head in the right place. Refine your story, talk to a bunch of people, like get feedback, make sure it passes like the mom test, the idea that like if you were to pitch this to your mom or your dad, like assume they know nothing about tech or the cutting edge, like they'd understand it. Walk a mile in the shoes of your investors, understand like how they're thinking about this so that you can like speak their language, like tell a good story and have the Notion doc. So like that's all the like table stakes stuff. You have to do that or you're not going to be successful. I've never seen a like successful fundraise without like, doing 80% of that pretty well. But beyond that, let's get into the nitty gritty of like more tactical things you should do. Homework. I personally never did homework in high school. All my teachers hated me. I would like sleep through class and like, somehow skate by the tests. And, but the reality is homework is like essential to have a successful fundraise. So what do I mean by homework? I mean like doing your research on all of basically building the universe of conceivable investors that might want to invest in your company and like creating just a killer spreadsheet or Airtable document or something. Like I'm talking like hundreds of investor names. There is no shortage of these like free open source lists of VCs, angels, family offices, all like, nicely segmented by industry, floating around Twitter, find them on Product Hunt. Like we probably have some in the launch house, like file system somewhere that we could send out. But yeah, like the universe of investors is like not that hard to find. If you're building in a certain industry, go look at Crunchbase and find 10 companies that are also in that industry and all the VCs that invested in them, because guess what? That means they're investing in that category, right? Go out and build a list of like 10 founders that have recently raised that you know in your network, and like talk to them and be like, hey, like, do you know any investors, right? That I should talk. There's just like so many ways to start building that universe, and that's like a crucial step, is creating the spreadsheet. But it's not just enough to have a spreadsheet of 100 names and that's it. You actually need like 10 more columns. You need like all the contact info, you know, their social media handles, Twitter and LinkedIn. Again, this is getting tactical now, so like this stuff's really important. If you don't want to go find it, hire a VA for like $8 an hour and like have them populate the list for you just based on the name. Like I have my entire life on autopilot with like VAs. Like everyone should do it. That's another founder hack if you don't do it. But yeah, like fill in all the details. Rocket Reach is good for finding your emails. And then have a column that says warm intro path. Every person on that list should have like, you know, 1 to 2 places that you could get a warm intro from, because like at the end of the day, venture capital and like the startup world, it's a relationship-based business. So is sales, right? Like everything in life pretty much is a relationship-based. We're humans after all. You know, we're not just a bunch of AI like algorithms selling to each other, or like, you know, trading bots, like passing packets back and forth. Like, no, we are human beings, and like we like emotions, right? It's why emotional appeals and startup pitches work. So warm intros are sort of the name of the game. A lot of people say, oh, like it's unfair, like it gatekeeps the industry. Like, yeah, sure, but at the end of the day, like we're all human beings, and like, you know, humans just want relationships. So while there is some of that, you just got to recognize the game you're playing and like not be mad at it, and learn how to play it. So I'm sharing the secrets of the game. So have that column. Also, like it's really important to have their Twitter accounts. This is something that I found that like works really well, is hyper personalize all of your outreach messages. So like building the universe is step one. The next is like actual outreach. And also when you're building that universe, have a column or something that says a little bit more details about the investor, right? Like what type of fund is it? Is this the fund invested in a company in my category, but like they actually write $8 million Series A checks usually. I'm raising a pre-seed fund. You have to qualify your list, right? You wouldn't reach out to like a bunch of sales leads if you're selling a product to customers that like would never buy your product, right? Your product is your equity. You're selling your equity. So you have to run this like a sales process. Build your universe of sales leads or like VC leads. Qualify the leads or like qualify the investors by like understanding, hey, and you can find all this out through their website, like pretty much, or like looking on LinkedIn or Crunchbase, like, hey, what size checks do they usually write? Are they investing in my industry? Like, do that due diligence and that research. And guess what that also does? It also helps you walk a mile in their shoes and understand like how they make decisions. And that's going to make you way more successful when you actually have the conversation. But the social media piece is really interesting. I've always found the most success, going to investors' Twitter profiles and just like seeing what they're tweeting about recently, and then like sending them a personal message or something about, something they've tweeted about recently, and like, oh, I liked your tweet or this or that. Like it's a hack. Example, we were pitching to an investor. I don't know if you guys know JMJ on Twitter, during like the Launch House seed round. Like I think he ended up not investing or something, but he's a friend anyway. We still talk to him a lot. But anyway, so this tactic maybe didn't work for him, but it got his attention nonetheless. So we had a call with him or something. I forget the exact context. So basically he was ghosting us, and we were like, all right, how do we get in touch? So I found one of his tweets, and he said, I love digital communities that pass like the digital laptop sticker test, aka putting your community name in your Twitter bio. Right? Like if you have a laptop and you put a company sticker on it, it means something. Like, but what's the digital equivalent of that? It's a company that it's basically a person that co-signs a relationship with the company by putting the name in their Twitter bio. And I was like, that's interesting. I know a lot of Launch House members are doing that. So I went on Twitter, found that like 44% of our community at the time had like all put Launch House in their bios, and I like screenshotted that, sent it to him, and I was like, hey, I just did this quick analysis, like based on your tweet, looks like our community hits that mark. And he's like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. And I think we got on a call with him or something, if I remember it right.
Yeah. And by the way, like these VCs are looking to validate their hypotheses. Yeah. Right? He's looking for that company who's going to prove him right.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, because it plays on their emotions. It gives them a little ego boost, and they feel validated. Also, like building the universe and like figuring out your warm intro path sometimes is not enough. Like it can be really hard to get in touch with some of these people. It's like, okay, like, wow, I have this big marquee investor, but no one in my network knows him. No one in the community know him. Like, how do I get in touch with him? Well, you can be like super creative. So I don't know if you guys know Alex Ohanian, 776, his venture fund. He's like the founder of Reddit. So they invested in the Series A round of my first startup, the software company. And I got in touch with him through this method. So what was the story? Oh, here's the story. I sent him here's what happened. Crazy story. So like this should just show you the level of like hustle that could be required to like get, in touch with some of these big name investors. I didn't have a warm intro path. I didn't know this guy. Like I was a very green thumb founder. Like this was, years ago. And I put out a tweet, and I wasn't big on Twitter. I'm still not big on Twitter. I had like 300 followers, but I was like, who are the best community-minded investors? And like I got a few replies, and then someone like tagged at Alex Sohania. And then like he saw that tag, and then he liked my tweet. I was like, okay, interesting. Broke first ground. And this was like just, again, total serendipity because I'm like a nobody on Twitter at the time. This was like 2019 or something. And what did I do? Oh yeah, I sent him an email with the subject line, a cold email that said, you liked my tweet on Twitter. And I sent it like 8 minutes after he liked my tweet. So it was like pretty fresh. Like and it caught his attention because he opened it like, a little while later and was like, oh, that's really cool. And I obviously pitched the company in the subject line or in the body, and he replied and he's like, deck. And I'm like, okay, cool. He sees the deck. We get coffee the next day in Brooklyn. We meet up, and then it's a really good meeting. And we thought for sure he was going to invest, and then ghosted us. We're like, oh, damn, I guess that one didn't work out. But like we still really wanted to talk to him. So what did I do? I like monitored his Twitter feed for like the next few days, and I saw a tweet that he posted about like some t-shirt that he was giving, like charity t-shirts. He's like, hey, if you buy one of these 25 t-shirts, we're giving the proceeds to charity. I was like, oh, that's cool. So I bought one of the t-shirts. I was like one of the first 25 to buy it. And in the Shopify checkout link, it said, add a custom guest like gift message or something. So I literally had 25 characters, and I was like, hey, Alexis, like just following up to our meeting, like, do you want to invest or something? Like, let's follow up. We didn't hear from you. And then whatever that was in 25 characters. And like, then he like responds finally, and he's like, oh my gosh, I saw like your, Shopify message. Like, thanks, I totally forgot, like blah, 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 blah. And then like, he ended up not actually investing then because like for some reason, but then like, so this was like actually 2018. And then a year later, he led the Series A of our like company because like I built that relationship. So like that one maybe didn't work out at the time, but like that only happened because like I had to go to like extreme lengths, to like track this guy down because like, he's not going to answer a normal cold email. Like, I don't know anyone in my network that was going to get in touch with him. So, like, I said that story, just those two stories, to illustrate, like, the degree of hustle to which you have to go to, like, make these deals happen.
Yeah. And I think an important point of that is that it's not that the investors are not interested when they ghost you or things fall through the cracks. Like, they can be very interested, but you have to remember, like, there are so many founders they're talking to all the time. And so if you are the one that keeps popping up at the top of their email inbox or in their t-shirt thing, like, of course they're going to listen to you, because guess what? One of the most important traits of being a successful founder is that type of grit and hustle. So,
Yeah, and what did we just learn like 10 minutes ago? That raising venture capital is like marketing, right? Like you are selling a piece of your company and VCs are buying a piece of your company. So when you keep popping to the top of their inbox or like unexpectedly out of left field and like their Shopify checkout link, gift comment section or like their Twitter feed or whatever, those are marketing touch points, right? Think of it like a marketing funnel to their brain. Like you are just like constantly reminding them, oh, hey, like I exist, I'm here, because like the best marketing hits us repeatedly and it hits us, at unexpected times, and like, it hits us in an emotional spot. So like that's what you got to do.
Another thing I think is interesting to touch on, I keep going back to the kind of the storytelling piece, is that like, in these instances, you're kind of basically, you're basically fitting your companies at the time into the theses of the investors, right? Versus telling them your thesis and then trying to convince them of that, right?
Yeah, you're curve fitting to their narrative, right? Like this is just how the human brain works. Like everyone's seen that big list of, these are the 20 most common cognitive biases or something. Like one of the most powerful is that like we fit the world, or we see the world to fit our own narrative, right? This is like why like politics are so, like polarized. It's like why, it's just, we fit the world we basically see the world the way we want to see it, right? So like if you can match your startup pitch to like a thesis that like an investor has already like declared that they believe is going to happen in the future, you're going to win.
Yeah, and quick comment. Balaji, our first investor, this was exactly how that happened, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So we Balaji released this book called The Network State. The Network State is about this future of communities, digital communities, with presence all around the world. I had somehow seen a presentation that he made that had literally a slide that looked like it was out of our deck he was like, I believe the future communities will have, single physical houses in major cities around the world. And just like Jacob did in all these stories, I did the same thing. Obviously, we were working together, but I shot him this message and I said, hey, we're building this. And then he said the same thing that Alexis Ohanian said. He said, deck. I sent him what I had, which was not really a deck. It was just like Notion memo, And by the way, that works really well because then they're like, wow, this is a very scrappy startup person who's focused on building, not pitching their deck. And then the next thing he said was safe. And obviously there's a lot more, relationship building and stuff that happened before that. But the reality was it really happened because the thesis lined up so perfectly,
Yeah, that's really well put.
So, okay, so we worked on our narrative, worked on our confidence, we worked on our spreadsheet with our list of investors and then the intro path amongst the other, and then we've qualified all those leads. Do you have any thoughts on how to run the process itself? We've talked about tactics for getting in front of investors, but do you have any thoughts in terms of timelines, which types of investors to speak with first, and then how to kind of drive that urgency in the round?
Yeah, this part of the process is really important because you can have the best story in the world, but if you don't run a really tight, disciplined, well thought out process, as they call it, your life's just gonna be really hard. So one of the, I guess another psychological principle for having a successful fundraise is leveraging the art of FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. So you basically want to make investors feel like, they're going to miss out on your deal or that they're missing something, and one of the best ways to do that is by adding social proof and adding competition to your fundraising process. So one example of how you could do this is block out a month of time and say, I want to approximately start to close, finish my fundraise in the next 4 weeks. But if week 1 or 2 of your process involve building that list and qualifying leads, you're going to fail because you just wasted 2 weeks of time. You should do all your homework, which includes everything we've talked about thus far, right? Honing your storytelling abilities, figuring out the Notion deck, the Notion memo, building the qualified leads list, warming up your network. That should all be done beforehand. That is homework. So if you were to run, for example, say a 4-week process or a 5-week process, you can tier your conversations so that you have, again, all these angels, as we talked about, who have a different return profile, who are probably easier to say yes to, right? An angel can say yes on the spot to investing. A VC might need a few different calls or multiple, diligence questions that they have. So you want to start with the lowest hanging fruit, which is people that are most likely to say yes. Angel investors are just individual people. I meet founders all the time and I'm this is a winner, you're a winner, here's $5K or something, So it's easy to figure out people. And they also add social proof and credibility. So if you were to tier that 4-week process for simplicity's sake accordingly, so you have your first week, you're going to meet with 25 angel investors. And in order to have 25 calls with angel investors, you might need 125 that you reached out to, which means you have to do the work again during the homework phase of building that list, right? And then maybe of those 25, you close 3, 4, 5. Usually it's 10% or something, or a little more than 10%. So, yeah.
So if you're saying that you need social proof, but you're hypothetically getting 3 to close, and you have a 4-week window, how long is the closing process? And how do you
Yeah, so having like a defined window can help you add time urgency. Like there's two different types of main urgency and fundraise. Brett, maybe there's more, but these are the two that come off the top of my head. One is time urgency, where you can say like, hey, look, like we're closing the fundraise soon. Like we're not going to take any more capital. Like you're either in or you're out, because it's the same thing with sales, right? Like if you let a customer wallow forever, like they're never going to close unless you say, hey, look, like we're onboarding our next cohort of customers by this Friday. And if you don't commit, you're not going to be able to get on board into our next cohort in like 3 months or something. Or like the pricing might go up. You have to add artificial urgency. So time urgency is one. Another is scarcity urgency, right? Like, will there even be room left in the raise because you have a lot of interest, right? So that's, again, it all comes back to this idea of like FOMO. So you have to add urgency. So if you like spend the first week talking to 25 angel investors and you're able to close a few, guess what you can do during weeks 2 through 4? You can set up calls with different institutional investors. So maybe like the pre-seed small funds, the easier funds you could set up during week 2, and then like the tier 1 top bigger seed funds you could email and get in touch with a meeting on week 3 or week 4. So that way you now are going into week 2 with these like small micro funds with like a few angel investors that are already committed. So again, you're adding FOMO, you're building social proof, and you can say, hey, like we're investing and we're not starting from ground zero. We have 3 great angel investors. Those angel investors, if they are going to put their money on the line, they're also great conduits to intros, right? So closing a few great angel investor sponsors is like a great way to like tap into their network, because they now have an incentivized reason to get you in front of other people, because like they want you to be successful. So then you have good calls with I'd call them like lower tier investors. Maybe one of them commits, and then you can go into the next week with more investors, more capital committed, and then things kind of snowball from there. And hopefully you get to like your top tier 1 meetings with like with multiple term sheets from institutional investors. Then you can say, hey, like we have all these term sheets, but we'd really love to work with you. And then they feel the FOMO, and like they'll like run a really quick diligence process and like hopefully get back to you way sooner and like give you a higher chance of, a term sheet, because like they're going to not be making this investment in a silo. They're going to be making it in the context of the information that you already have other offers, which means they're like, what do these other investors see that I don't? Like, damn, they got to me first. Like those fuckers, like, it starts to, again, play on their psychology, because we have to get investors thinking not rationally, but emotionally.
What happens if why should I not spread out my process and like talk to one investor now, wait for them to make a decision, and then talk to another investor after they made a decision?
So if you're trying to get married and like find a lifelong partner, and like you feel like you're running out of time, like you're 29 years old, would you just have like one date here and then like kind of see how it goes, and then like, maybe in 3 months I'll go on like another date? Like, no, you'd probably start like aggressively swiping on dating apps and like want to like, I don't know, or whatever maybe go to more social events, like try to meet people, right? Like volume is the name of the game. It makes a lot more sense to just like have as many people that you're talking to as possible. Because like the other thing is, investing is kind of a consensus game. So like, and FOMO builds as more and more people hear about you. So if like you're talking to like, 20 investors one week, like those 20 investors in the Whisper network will probably start talking about you, in your deal. And then like the investors that you have calls with the next week have already heard about you. So like, again, it's a marketing touch point. So like the more people you talk to, the more word of mouth, like your word starts to spread within these like small communities. Like, as we said, there's only like, 1,000 major institutional VC funds, and like maybe like, 10,000 or so like decently large AUM professional investors. Like, sure, there's a lot of angels, but like even then, like look at anyone's LinkedIn profile. We all probably have like 87 mutual connections. Like, this is a small industry at the end of the day. Like, some of the biggest names in VC on Twitter like only have like 50,000, 100,000 followers. Like, it's a small industry relative to the size of the world. So like these whisper networks are real. Like, there's a reason that word of mouth marketing is so powerful.
Also, in this market that we're in, these fundraisers are taking longer. So that means these whisper networks are actually in play. Like, people are actually talking, right?
Yeah, and guess what? The whisper networks can work against you. So like if you take like 3-4 months to fundraise and like, really spread out your convos and like didn't do all your research up front, word might start getting around like, oh, they've been raising forever. Like, oh, didn't I see that deal 3 months ago? Damn, they're still not finishing their fundraise. Like, all of a sudden you start to look like, basically VCs will start to think, no one must want them. Like, I sure as hell don't want them. So
I want to like come back to this y equals mx plus b thing that you mentioned, because it feels like there's a parallel here, because it's the slope formula, right?
Yeah.
And so during a fundraise, it's like you want to have a high slope, right? Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
Go for it.
No, you take it.
Okay.
You take it.
So it's like if you have 30% of your round committed on week 1, which is from the angels and the easy funds that you kind of mentioned, then you have 60% on week 2. Wow. 30 to 60, or even 30% on week 1. Hey, we just started fundraising. It's Thursday. We have 30% of our round done. I don't really care what you're building. That's pretty impressive. That's pretty cool. Week 2, 60%, even 50%. If you're an investor and you haven't made a decision, you're probably starting to fear that you're going to miss out. You don't even have time to think about whether or not this is due diligence on the market or whatever. Obviously, in this macro economy, like there is time, but that's kind of the mathematical side of urgency, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. Don't you guys just love analogies?
Yeah. Okay, let's say I have made it and I have a term sheet. We're getting to the final phases of fundraising. I have a term sheet. Like, what does that mean? How can I use that to close the rest of my round? Should I take it? All that stuff.
Yeah, so there's 2 types of term sheets generally. There's like just plain old safe notes, and then there's priced rounds. So priced rounds, you probably won't get an offer for that until you're at like the seed or Series A round. But yeah, a priced round generally means that like you have a lead investor, they're coming in, they're like committing a certain amount of capital, maybe say like 80% of your round or however much you initially wanted to raise. And then they're like kind of helping shop you around to find the last 20%, or they're saying like, hey, we want to close this in 3 weeks. You have 3 weeks to find like the last, 20% of your investors. And then you have all the leverage, right? Because like you can go out to anybody you want in the world, within reason, and say, hey, like we have this term sheet. We have a great lead investor. Like having a lead investor is powerful. So that's like how a priced round works. For a non-priced round, when it's safe notes, you generally don't necessarily like have a lead, especially at like the early like pre-seed stage. Sometimes funds like to say they're leading, but it's kind of semantics. Like it doesn't even really mean anything if it's like not a priced round for someone to like lead a round per se, if it's just safe notes. But again, it can be a powerful thing. You also want to be cautious of like all of like the what's the word I'm looking for? The extra clauses that VCs will sneak onto to a lot of term sheets nowadays. So we talked at the beginning of the conversation tonight about how the market's impacting things. And we concluded not that much, but the one place where I have seen a lot of uptick is like VCs including more aggressive terms as like appendixes to their safe note documents. So things like liquidity, extra liquidity preferences, in the case of an acquisition, or like extra super pro rata or something, which means like they get to like invest more and more, like MFN clauses, like what YC does. So you just got to like watch out and make sure you have like a GC, like a general counsel, to look over all of your term sheets. And if you do get a term sheet offer from a VC, it's generally wise not to like accept it on the spot, unless like you already kind of know in your heart, like, oh, we want to work with them. Like, when we got the A16Z term sheet for Launch House, we were just kind of like, yeah, like no point in shopping this around. Like we have a relationship there. We believe in them as a long-term partner. Like, they have a lot of respect in the industry. Like, let's just do the deal. But if you have a term sheet, like it's generally wise to say like, hey, like I appreciate this offer. I'm really excited to work with you, but like I have to do what's best for the business, and close out a few more of my conversations that I'm having, and then like go and shop around that term sheet. And by shop around, I mean like go hit up all the investors that you've talked to that maybe like haven't said yes yet, and say, hey, by the way, we have a term sheet, and like we're actively like picking our big head investor like soon. Can you like get back to us? And it'll just layer on the urgency. But when you have that conversation, it's like kind of nuanced, because like you don't generally want to like share the names of the investors. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. You just want to be really like careful when you start playing the game, because it's a small industry. People talk. You don't want to like rub people the wrong way and make like an investor just gave you a term sheet, like have a bad impression or leave a poor taste in their mouth. Because like at the end of the day, you're building a company that has to get yay big, remember? So how long is that going to take? 10 plus years. That means you're going to be working with this investor for 10 plus years. Do you really want to like start the relationship off with like a weird foot where like they feel like they don't really want you? Like, you know, it's like you're getting married to someone and you're like, I'm not sure. I kind of want to go date a few more people, like, you know, the day before the wedding or something. So like, you know, just be cautious if you're like going to leverage term sheets, but it can turn out really well for you. My first company, we had like, one of them was like a real term sheet. One was just kind of like a verbal agreement. But we were talking to like A16Z and Sequoia, and we ultimately ended up like taking a offer from Felicius Ventures because they gave us like way better terms. It was like way less aggressive. They didn't want a board seat, or no, they did want a board seat, but they were like, we'll like do a co-voting where like we just vote with everything that the CEO says. So it was effectively like a dummy board seat where like they didn't do anything, and we were like, yeah. So, and like my co-founder who was the CEO at the time, he's like, I'm taking this deal. So I was like, okay. So yeah, like, you know, you can leverage these things and get better terms, especially if they start throwing in these like weird extra clauses.
Sweet. I feel like I want to open it up for questions. What do you think? Is there anything else we should be at?
I think that was honestly pretty comprehensive. Like I usually give this presentation with like, you know, not a whiteboard and a PowerPoint slide. So I hope this format was, you know, fun and accessible for everyone. But yeah, let's do Q&A.
Go ahead.
So I have a question. If you're a solo founder and you have a potential co-founder that wants to come on board, but they can't leave their company because, so I'll give you the real life example. He works at Apple. He's an AR engineer. He can't leave because anything he works on at Apple right now is property of Apple. So he needs the company to be funded in order for him to leave. It's a catch-22. How do you walk an investor through that?
So there's multiple different types of, look, investors are not like one size catch all beasts. Like we spent this whole conversation, like I want to caveat, we're talking in generalities, right? Like some investors, no matter how good you layer on the emotional pitch, they're still just going to be like hardcore analytical and like, you know, ruthless and compartmentalize your pitch. But there's generally different types of investors. Some will like understand, okay, like I understand, you know, situations are nuanced and like people have lives and financial situations and like maybe they're empathetic, but like, I don't know, like as an investor, I'm kind of like, if they're not willing to take the risk, you know, to like jump ship and go all in even without funding, then like this business might not make sense for them. Like when, and again, maybe I say this just in like a privileged position, but like, you know, my first company, like I quit my job and like I had really no savings. Like I was sleeping on friends' couches in New York, like genuinely true, real story. And like, I didn't come from much, you know, financially with my parents. So like, it's not like I was like some, you know, like rich trust fund kid that had money to fall back on. Like it wasn't the case. And like, we had no revenue, no customers, like, you know, and like, we didn't raise funding for like the first like 7 months of the business, you know? So like, I was in the opposite position where like, you know, I had to kind of give it all up and put it all on the line in order to like make the company happen before we got like our first dime of investor money. So, you know, that's just my perspective.
I would also say that there are certain types of investors who will make an investment like before you've kind of quit your job. I know some folks who were early employees at this big unicorn, I forgot what it was, but they applied to YC while they were still at this company. Obviously, they had a lot of money on the table, right? They would have left a lot of money on the table if they had left the company, and they got into YC and then left, right? So they had that money. They obviously had a lot of money from the exit, but they were able to raise a little bit before they.
Yeah, I also have seen a few like fellowships pop up here and there where they're like, you know, on Twitter and stuff, where it's like, we'll pay you to quit your job. You know, we'll pay you $100K to quit your job. So like, again, there's different types of investors. You know, that might have different options for you, but yeah.
Thanks, Bert. How do you sort of keep, I guess, investors? I know you said to like try to run a tight process, but I guess there's reality at the same time. So sometimes you just can't, and sometimes you just come across people.
Well,
how do you?
Why can't you run a tight process?
You just, I guess, like I'm sort of in the beginning to meet people stage, and like trying to build my network, and sometimes people just come across my plate, and it's still early for me, so I don't have a real forcing function, if that makes sense. And how do you keep them interested, or do you just kind of forget about them for a while, and then once you, I guess, like I really begin the process, then it's like, okay, we need to close. We're gonna.
I think you answered your own question. I mean, like, look, if we draw it back to the marketing analogy, if you see like one ad one time on Instagram, are you gonna buy the product? No. But when you start seeing like, that ad everywhere on all your platforms and like 7 times in the same week, like, yeah, you're gonna, maybe think about it. So, yeah, I mean, the advice I give you, and you kind of, again, answered your own question, is just like get to a point where like you feel like you have that universe built out enough of people, where you can like run a process that induces FOMO and like maximizes the number of marketing touch points, and also maximizes the number of potential customers or VCs that could buy your product, right? Okay, buy your equity.
One strategy I've seen work very well from a Launch House member. She basically spent a month or 2 months running around asking VCs and investors and angels advice, right? Asking for thoughts. Hey, what are your thoughts on what it works?
Huh?
So she just asked for advice. She spent a month running around asking, hey, like, this is my first time fundraising. She's first time founder. What should I do? What metrics matter? And then she'd kind of just slip in some like really good things about her company. And they'd be like, oh, well, like, I definitely want to see like, the founder is a good fit. And she'll be like, oh, wow, I've been working in this space my whole life. Do you think that is good? And then the investors are like, yeah, okay, yeah, all right. She's never asked for any sort of funding. She's literally just asking for advice. She said, okay, great, like, thanks, bye. And then the investors kind of sitting there being like, whoa, like, that was a good company. I hope she lets me know when she fundraises. And she wound up raising from like one of the best investors, right? Obviously, it was a great fit, a great company, but I think that method really works. And the really important thing is it's lined exactly what Jacob is saying, is like you're putting your marketing and banner up all over the world. You're doing marketing. You're telling people you exist. And then when you go out for the fundraise, you're not fundraising until you're fundraising, right? Then you say, hey, we're fundraising. We're doing it in 3 weeks. I don't know, would you add anything?
No, that's a great idea and anecdote. And I mean, another thing is like, if we keep drawing out this marketing analogy, like, how would you get your first 100 customers or 12 customers? Like, how are you doing it? You have to basically qualify a big enough list and universe of people. Like, it's all word of mouth. It's all like hacky ways to get in touch with people. It's like getting them to like emotionally buy into this product and this vision that doesn't really exist yet. Like, it's the same concept. So like, if you can't figure out a way to like kickstart your VC and investor process, like, why are you even building a company, right? Like, it's just distribution. It's just getting people excited. It's the exact same playbook that you have to apply to your early customer base. It's just a little more nuanced when you get into like the pitch meetings, right?
Hi, Jacob. Thanks for this incredible meeting. So my question is, could you please repeat the same exercise with this guy for me? I do Shopify, but for real mobile apps. What is the context? Big picture? I don't know. If you want.
What do you mean by real mobile apps?
Yeah. Real mobile apps. This is the apps which you can publish to App Store and Google Play without any coding. But you have not only an application. You have also emails, push notifications, and so on. All the stuff you need to rise your business, to develop your business via mobile apps. That's it. This is what I do. No.
Shopify was like the analogy, like.
Huh?
Shopify was the like one-liner.
It's like a reference. Shopify is a reference, and
it's like- it's
Shopify is a part of my one-liner.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's a good one. I mean, yeah, I would think about something along the lines of like how it, used to take teams of developers, years to build an app and hundreds of thousands. Oh, Mike's still. Or maybe like the cost. Hello. Or maybe like it now costs $0. Like all you need to start a company is $0 on a mobile phone. Yeah.
I think the two trends you want to talk about are the rise of the continued rise of mobile. So one of the hard things is to convince investors that an old trend is new again, right? Hey, like mobile apps have been around for a long time, right? Like there are investors who have like these graphs of like the S curve of mobile adoption basically being done. So that's working against you, right? So you're kind of saying, so you either have to find a new trend, which is maybe in snow code, or you have to tell people the why now for that old trend, which is like, well, you're talking about helping people create their businesses through mobile apps. Okay, the rise of independent entrepreneurs, that is a massive trend.
Yeah, creator economy.
The creator economy, right? And this idea that mobile apps, is this massive economy. Every entrepreneur wants to create a mobile app or has a mobile app idea, and nobody is technical, and that you don't have to be anymore because no-code technology has gotten to a point where it's no longer janky,
Yeah, so maybe the idea is like the big overarching mega trend is that the future of work is independent online creators, right? But yeah, well, it's like, and it's happening in like, every niche. There's tools exploding, right? Like there's Twitch for live streamers, like there's Etsy for for this, for that.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But like there's all these platforms that have enabled, multi-billion-dollar like industries of creators to make livelihoods online. But mobile apps has still been stuck in like, 2015, right? It's been left behind. So it's like, whoa, again, how do you make something old new again, right? It's like, whoa, mobile apps are these things that everyone knows about. It's an established category, but like now there's like a brand new user base, right? That can be like using these mobile apps.
One thing I'll point out though, like I don't think this is a case for you, but like in doing this exercise, you may actually find that your company is not riding multiple waves like Jacob was talking about, right? Because if let's take, okay, we're doing a PHP, learn how to code in PHP company, right? Okay, whoa, that's like really old school. And if you go through this exercise, like how am I going to tell this story about how this is going to become a big thing? If you can't come up with that story, you're probably in a space that is not a venture scale, or at least with these, massive returns that, institutions are looking for, you're not in a space like that. And so what's nice though is that you can toggle things. Well, you're like, okay, it's ed tech. I'm really passionate about educating, people how to learn how to code or learn how to build stuff. Oh, Web3 is a massive trend. Smart contract engineering. Okay, wow. That is a different thing. That has a why now. So I guess TLDR is that not every company will have a good answer for this. And if you don't have a good answer, you should kind of maybe go back to the drawing board.
Hi, Jacob. Thank you very much for a great presentation. I want to talk about the first line, what you said about the story. And, different technology, for example, like mine, deep tech, you can put into a very different context. And it's very interesting what you think about the trends, the current trends, and the trends which will be very popular for the next year or 3 or 5. What do you think about that?
As it pertains to deep tech?
Yeah, my company is a brain-computer interface company.
Wow. Okay. So again, like every company has like a why now moment and like waves that are underpinning it, and depending on the type of product you're creating and the industry you're creating, like you need to figure out how you can position the story such that it fits within like a realistic timeline, right? Like if I could go out tomorrow and say like, hey, I'm building a platform for transhumanism, right, to like help people live forever. It's like, okay, great. Like that's still 50 years away, but so I think something that's realistic is positioning that as maybe like, well, so here's the thing: you have to figure out like if the timing is right on your opportunity, right? Like, are we 10 years away from a brain computer interface? Yes. Okay, then it makes sense within like the venture, because like what is a venture fund? If you look at it's a 10-year money flipping vehicle, right? So over the course of 10 years, investors have to put money in and they have to get money out to return money for their LPs, which means that a certain number of those dots on the graph, aka your companies, have to like return liquidity. It's like a venture fund is literally a financial instrument. So like if you're building something that like is not going to exist in like 20 years or for 20 years or something, it's like it's too early, right? This is like, I don't know if anyone remembers Webvan. It was basically Amazon Go or like Instacart in 2001. It raised like $100 million in funding, and guess what? It failed because no one had mobile phones yet. There wasn't great like, you know, delivery infrastructure. The gig economy didn't exist yet, so they had to hire their own drivers, and it was just like a total mess. But now like Instacart, you know, as of 2017, whenever when they started, it's now a multi-billion-dollar company. Same thing with like Amazon Go, Uber Eats delivers, like all these things. The timing, you know, is different, right? Like, so I'm not saying you're building something at the wrong time. I'm saying you have to figure out how to position your story such that like the VC is going to believe that this innovation is achievable, or maybe some facet of this innovation is achievable within like, you know, the next decade. Does that help? Yeah. Yeah, what are the trends? I mean, I don't know enough about like, you know, okay. Oh, like what are sort of the general big trends that are happening? Oh, one I think is we're going to enter the age of biotech, right? So like crypto Web3 has sort of been like the thing that's dominated, you know, the kind of frontier innovation conversation since like 2017 and whatnot. But I think we're about to enter a new age where, yeah, like biotech, biological innovation, you know, the idea of like the quantified self, like, you know, a lot of body diagnostics, like innovations in healthcare coming from the private markets, like all this stuff's going to happen. So I think that's a huge, massive trend. Another, and this is beyond just crypto, but it's like more and more institutions are just going to continually get, you know, disrupted. Gatekeepers are going to get removed. You know, power is going to continually like expand to the people more and more. Those are probably like two of the big ones that excite me most. Brett, do you have any that come to mind?
This is ironic because this is armchair philosophy and we're in armchairs. I don't know if I have any. I wanted to quickly comment on the kind of the Elon Musk deep tech strategy. Like Elon Musk is like typically building companies with like 50-year, you know, even 100-year horizons. So, you know, he has a Neuralink, he has Tesla, SpaceX, going to Mars. And the very interesting trend throughout all of his companies, obviously they're all deep tech, they all require massive, massive R&D, massive technological breakthroughs that require a ton of capital and are very hard to do. Somehow he does it. But they always start with a very near-term, really lucrative business opportunity. Elon didn't start SpaceX to deliver stuff to the ISS. He didn't start SpaceX to create, you know, give internet to everybody. But those two businesses are so lucrative that it's going to power SpaceX to do the thing that he wants to do, which is populate Mars, right? Neuralink is working with patients who have like these neurodegenerative disorders, but he wants to basically create an interface for everybody between whatever. So I think the interesting thing is like taking kind of like these massive technological things, but like finding a near-term opportunity. I want to leave room for one more question. Last one.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time, Jacob. You mentioned the word generalities about, early stage investing, but I was just curious when it comes to pre-seed, seed, fundraising in LA, is there anything unique about fundraising in this market or specific advice you'd give about fundraising in this market?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I like to think of, and I think we all probably do, but Silicon Valley is just like a global institution now, right? It's more of an idea that's not confined to like one particular geography. So like you're really building your company in the metaverse, right? You're not building it in LA. So I wouldn't constrain yourself to one particular social graph or set of geographic tethered investors if you're going out to do a raise. If you already have like a pre-existing network here, I think it makes sense to leverage it, and like in-person meetings can be powerful. I think it's just a no-brainer that it's easier to make relationships over coffee than it is over a Zoom screen, but it also takes a lot more time. Like you could hit 3 Zoom meetings back to back, 4 meetings even, in the time it takes to like drive to a coffee place, have the conversation, drive back, and like all that. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm like all about, just raising from investors all over the country rather than one particular geography. As far as like this climate, I'd say know the lay of the land. So there's like the cool thing about LA is like it's a melting pot of like a ton of different social graphs, right? It's like the epicenter of culture and like distribution. There's Hollywood, media, entertainment, influencers, creators, all those types of people. There's a few other like types of industries here too, and then tech is bifurcated into like, and I've been here for 2 years, so like I kind of know the lay of the land, but I still don't know that much probably. But tech's bifurcated into what I call like the old LA tech and the new LA tech. The new LA tech is transplants, like me and Brett. Like, I came from New York in the metaverse. Like Brett came from San Francisco. Like, we decided to make home here, and there's a lot of other folks that came from like different tech hubs, namely San Francisco, that are now here because like the weather's great, the vibes are good. I fully endorse it, and like they kind of hang out in their own social circles. And then there's the people that like were from LA, right? That like they've started venture capital funds here over the past 10, 20 years or so, or like they come from Snapchat or something, and they're kind of like a little disconnected from that social circle. So yeah, I think just kind of know the lay of the land and prioritize the metaverse, and like be cautious if you're taking too many in-person meetings because it is a big opportunity cost of your time, but it can increase the chance of something closing. So that would be my advice to you as far as investors in LA go. The other thing is like, if we're talking about the, old LA tech social graph, like, they're probably a little bit more, I don't know, boomer and disconnected from like, the folks that maybe came from SF or a little bit more like Sand Hill Road native. And like, I'm using a lot of, again, generalizations and stuff here, but like, I don't know, like, the stereotypes of the VC world are like probably true in some regards. So.
All right. Thanks y'all for coming. You could give Jacob a round of applause real quick. Nice. Some quick housekeeping. Again, we didn't really give this intro, but this is Launch House. Welcome everybody who's not here. This is actually typically a members only event. So welcome non-members. Launch House is a membership community for founders. The goal is 2 things of the community. Level up, which is what we're doing tonight, which is helping everybody get the knowledge and everything they need to fundraise, build great companies, do all that stuff. But what's really important about Launch House that's different from most other communities and accelerators and things is this live better piece. So that's about taking care of yourself, making deep connections, deep friendships, mental and physical health. The other talk that Jacob gives is actually about wellness, because he's actually a wellness guru in addition to a fundraising guru. So this guy kind of embodies what we stand for. Obviously, he's the co-founder, so it makes a lot of sense. but yeah, if you want to learn more about Launch House, hit us up. If you want to learn more fundraising tips, probably juicy off the record fundraising tips after this, we'll turn the cameras off and then we'll be chatting. So thanks, everybody. Oh, quick aside. Two, congrats. Do you want to share it?
No, I mean.
All right, Caro closed her round, right? And Miriam became a U.S. citizen today. Woo! So we've got some cake and stuff.
At Launch House, we celebrate with cake. So I invite Garo and Miriam to go cut the cake. And everyone, please have some.
Woo!
Hello. All right, the cohort, we're going to take a quick group photo by where Garo and Miriam are.